In 1978, I was living just outside Bristol in a semi-detached house at the end of a quiet, dead-end street. My parents both worked evenings during the week, Mum at a local library and Dad doing night shifts for British Rail, so they usually hired a neighbor girl named Allison to babysit me. She was 16, lived just 3 doors down, and was more interested in smoking silk cut and listening to her cassette player than actually watching me. Still, I liked her well enough. She let me stay up later than I was supposed to and didn't care if I had biscuits before bed. Most nights were uneventful, TV, toast, and trying to fall asleep with the glow of the landing light outside my door. Our house was pretty typical for the time. Brown floral carpet in the lounge, gas fire that clicked when it was cooling down, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all with creaky floorboards. The only unusual thing was that the upstairs hallway light had burnt out, and Dad hadn't gotten around to fixing it. So if you needed to go upstairs after dark, you had to use a torch or just brave the dark. I hated it. One Thursday night in early October, Allison showed up just after 6. She had feathered hair, flared jeans, and a stack of bangles on her wrist. I remember thinking she looked like one of the women from the album covers my sister used to collect. Mum and Dad gave their usual instructions, kissed me goodbye, and left. For the first hour or so, everything was normal. Allison stayed downstairs while I played with my action men in the front room. It wasn't until I came back from brushing my teeth that things started to feel a little off. I was sitting on the sofa watching the Tomorrow People rerun when Allison came into the room and said she was just popping out for a bit. I asked where she was going, and she just smiled and said, "Only over to Gemma's house. I'll be back before your bedtime." Before I could say anything else, she grabbed her coat and was out the door. I stood there for a few seconds, wondering if I should tell my parents. But we didn't have a phone in the house, only the red phone box at the end of the street. I didn't feel brave enough to go out there alone after dark. I sat back down and turned the telly back on, trying to act like it was no big deal. But the house felt different without anyone else in it. The noises were louder, the hum of the fridge, the occasional creak from the pipes, and the wind was picking up outside. At some point, I turned off the TV and went to the kitchen to grab a drink. As I passed the staircase, I thought I heard something upstairs. It sounded like a soft creak, just one, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. I stared up into the dark landing and didn't move for a good 10 seconds. Then I told myself it was probably just the wood shifting, like it always did. I went back into the living room and turned the volume up louder than usual. I even pulled the curtains shut tighter. But a few minutes later, I heard it again. Only this time, it was 2 creaks. Not loud, but definitely footsteps. Slow. I turned the TV off again and sat in total silence listening. The sound came again. One more creak, right above me, in the hallway outside my parents' room. My first instinct was to run out of the house, but I felt frozen. It was like I couldn't move or breathe properly. I was alone, and someone was walking around upstairs. I finally stood up and tiptoed to the foot of the stairs. I didn't call out. Something about the silence made me feel like I shouldn't. I just stood there listening. The creaking had stopped. I stared up into the darkness, heart thudding so loudly, I thought I could hear it echoing. I kept waiting to hear another sound, anything, but it was dead quiet again. I turned and backed slowly into the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the drawer, and then crouched near the hallway, just out of sight from the stairs. It felt like I stayed there for ages, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then I heard it. Bare feet coming down the stairs, one slow step at a time. I didn't even breathe. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry, like they knew I hadn't left. I gripped the knife tighter and waited, but just as they got to the bottom, the front door opened. Allison's voice called out, "I'm back!" The steps stopped. I rushed into the hallway, but there was no one there. No one on the stairs, no sound of movement. I shouted for her, panicked. She came in and saw me with the knife and turned white. "What the hell are you doing?" she asked. I just pointed up the stairs. She checked the whole house while I stayed by the door, ready to run. Every room was empty, every window locked from the inside. No sign of a break-in, nothing. She was shaken, but tried to brush it off, saying it was probably just the old pipes or my imagination. I didn't argue. When my parents got back the next morning, I told them everything. They were furious with Allison, of course, but no one really believed me about the footsteps. Even now, decades later, I still don't know what I heard that night. But I've never forgotten the sound of those bare feet coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate, like they knew exactly where to find me. It was the summer after I graduated high school, and I was living just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My friends and I were stuck in that weird limbo between school and whatever came next. College for some, factory work, or the military for others. We spent most of our time that summer doing the usual small-town stuff, driving around aimlessly, drinking cheap beer by the river, and sneaking into places we weren't supposed to be. One night, Kyle brought up Camp Fairwood, an old summer camp out near the state forest that had been shut down for a few years. Nobody had been out there in ages, and of course that made it the perfect target for us. There were 5 of us that night. Me, Kyle, Marcus, Gina, and Sarah. We waited until just after midnight and took Kyle's station wagon out along the back roads. The place wasn't far, maybe 30 minutes outside of town, but the last few miles were dirt and gravel, and by the time we reached the camp's rusted front gate, the woods were dead silent. There was a chain on the gate, but it wasn't locked, just looped through the posts. We pushed it open and drove in slow, parking behind one of the old cabins to stay hidden in case anyone happened by. The whole place was dark, overgrown, and full of that damp, earthy smell of old wood and wet leaves. At first, it was kind of fun. We walked around with flashlights, peeking into the mess hall and some of the bunkhouses. Most of them still had furniture and some old gear left behind. A few bunks, broken canoes, and even a faded chalkboard with names and dates from years ago. The girls joked about ghost stories, and Marcus kept trying to scare them by jumping out from behind doors. But after a while, something about the place started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific, just this weird sense that we weren't as alone as we thought. We were halfway through the old dining hall when we heard something. A soft clatter, like wood shifting under pressure. We all froze. At first, we thought maybe it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer outside. But then we heard it again, this time more distinct. It sounded like a door creaking open slowly. Kyle whispered for everyone to shut off their flashlights. and we stood there in the dark, trying not to breathe too loud. The building had windows along one side, and with the moon out, we could just barely make out the shapes of tables and chairs. And that's when we saw it. A figure moving outside, slowly walking past the windows. None of us spoke. The person, or whatever it was, didn't have a flashlight and moved like they knew exactly where they were going. Gina grabbed my arm hard. The figure passed by the window and disappeared around the side of the building. We waited maybe 30 seconds before Marcus whispered, "That's not one of us, right?" Of course it wasn't. No one had wandered off. Kyle motioned for us to move, and we ducked out the back of the dining hall, sticking close to the wall and trying to stay low. The idea now was to get back to the car. Fast. We didn't run right away. We crept through the shadows, moving cabin to cabin, hoping we were being paranoid. But when we reached the trail back to where the car was parked, we all stopped. There were fresh footprints in the dirt that hadn't been there before. Not from one of us. These were deeper, larger, and they came from the direction of the woods, not the camp buildings. Kyle turned to look at us and said quietly, "Someone's out here." Then we heard a twig snap, somewhere just behind the tree line. That was it. We bolted. We tore down the trail as fast as we could, stumbling over roots and barely staying on our feet. Gina kept looking over her shoulder, and at one point she let out this half scream and shouted that she saw someone in the trees. I didn't turn to look. I just ran harder. When we reached the car, Kyle fumbled the keys, dropped them, and cursed loud enough to echo. For a split second, we were all exposed under the moonlight, hearts pounding, waiting for something, anything, to burst from the woods behind us. The doors unlocked, and we piled in. Kyle started the engine just as we heard movement in the brush, maybe 15 feet away. Headlights hit the edge of the trees, but there was nothing visible, just shadows. We didn't stick around. Kyle threw the car into reverse and peeled out onto the dirt road, sending gravel flying. None of us said much on the drive back. It wasn't until we were halfway to town that Marcus said what we were all thinking. That person didn't stumble on us. They were already there. It made our skin crawl. The idea that we had walked into someone else's hiding place. We never reported it. None of us could really explain what we saw, and no one wanted to admit we'd broken into the camp. A week later, Gina told me she'd looked up the property. Turns out the camp had been shut down after someone drowned in the lake. And to this day, no one knows how it happened. No one was supposed to be out there, but someone was. In the fall of 1978, I was working for a small import company out of Albany, New York. We weren't huge, but we had a few clients scattered across the state, and that meant I was on the road more than I liked. I didn't mind the travel as much as I minded the hotels. A lot of them were budget places that cut corners. This one particular trip took me up near Utica, where I was supposed to meet with a supplier about some overdue shipments. My boss booked me a last-minute stay at a small independent hotel just off the main road, tucked behind a row of shuttered businesses. The place didn't look terrible at first. The neon sign out front was flickering, but the lobby was clean enough. And the older man behind the desk gave me a room key without much conversation. He didn't ask for ID, which felt odd, but I was too tired to care. My room was on the second floor, facing the back lot. The carpet was worn thin, the bedspread was stiff, and there was this faint smell of mildew I couldn't quite place. Still, I tossed my suitcase on the chair and started going through my notes for the next day's meeting. I remember thinking the quiet was almost too quiet. No TVs, no voices through the walls, no traffic sounds outside. That first night I fell asleep early, but woke up just after midnight. There was this odd clicking sound coming from the hallway, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing in shoes that didn't quite fit. I sat up in bed and listened. It would stop, then start again. I told myself it was probably just the building settling or someone heading to their room, but it went on for over an hour, stopping every time I got close to the door. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I asked the man at the front desk if anyone else was staying on my floor. He just shrugged and said the hotel had been quiet for weeks. He didn't ask why I was curious, and I didn't offer an explanation. I grabbed a quick coffee in the lobby and left for my meeting. By the time I got back that evening, it was already getting dark. There was only one other car in the parking lot, a faded blue Buick with out-of-state plates. I didn't see anyone come or go the entire time I was there. That second night, the pacing started again. But this time it came from right outside my door. The steps were slower now, and every so often I'd hear a faint creak, like someone was leaning against the wall or pressing on the doorknob. I turned off all the lights in the room and sat in the chair across from the door, just listening. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. Eventually, the sounds stopped again. But this time I swear I heard something even weirder. A slow, dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy down the carpeted hall. I barely slept. At dawn, I went downstairs and told the desk clerk, a different man this time, that someone had been walking around the halls during the night. He gave me this look like I was bothering him and muttered something about the building having old bones. I asked if there was security. He said no, but they had cameras on the exits. That didn't reassure me much. I considered checking out early, but the meeting had been rescheduled to the following morning, and I figured I could make it through one more night. That last night, I shoved a chair under the door handle and left the bathroom light on. I tried to sleep, but my nerves wouldn't let me. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps in the hall, deliberate and steady. But this time, they didn't just pass my door. They stopped right outside it. I could hear breathing, slow, shallow. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then came a soft knock. Not loud, just 3 light taps. I sat there frozen, heart pounding, and after maybe a full minute, the footsteps started up again, moving slowly down the hallway and fading into silence. At first light, I checked out without waiting for breakfast. The lobby was empty, no desk clerk, no other guests. I left the key on the counter and walked out. Before getting into my car, I turned around and looked up at the 3rd floor. A curtain in one of the windows shifted, but I couldn't see anyone behind it. I told myself it was probably just a draft, or maybe someone finally waking up. But something about that place felt wrong. Not haunted, just off. Like it was caught in time and no one bothered to notice. 2 weeks later, I mentioned the hotel to a client in the city. He raised an eyebrow and said, "That place? I thought it shut down years ago." I told him it was open when I stayed there. and he just shook his head and said, "They had a fire. Think someone died in one of the upper floors. No one goes there anymore." I never looked it up after that. Didn't want to know. But sometimes in unfamiliar hotels on late business trips, I still wake in the dark, not sure why, listening for footsteps outside the door that never come.